Olá, pessoal. Boa tarde. TUTAMÉIA inicia agora mais uma transmissão ao vivo, sempre trazendo para você um personagem que nos ajude a entender o Brasil e o mundo em que vivemos. Ela é Eleonora.
Ele é o Rodolfo.
E ele é o Tariq Ali, um dos mais importantes intelectuais da atualidade, que vai estar conosco aí na próxima hora. A entrevista vai ser feita em inglês e até agora a gente não conseguiu contatar os nossos tradutores colaboradores. Então, se você é bom aí em tradução simultânea, quiser ir escrevendo nos comentários, sempre ajuda. De qualquer forma, toda a entrevista vai ser transcrita em sua íntegra, ou na maior parte, na nossa reportagem no site tutameia.jor.br e a entrevista fica disponível no nosso canal de vídeo no youtube.com/c/Eleonora e Rodolfo Lucena, TUTAMÉIA. Dito isso, thank you very much, Tariq, for being with us. And Eleonora will start with her first question.
Dear Tariq, thank you again for being with us. I would like to ask you in the beginning about the situation in Brazil. We are very worried about what's happening here, and I'm sure you have your view on the political process here in Brazil. What do you think about what's happening here in Brazil in your view?
I think that the election results of the first round, which will be repeated in the second round, it looks like, unless a miracle happens, and I don't normally believe in miracles. But what has happened is a total and complete political disaster for Brazil. And we have to be very sober and cold-blooded in analyzing the reasons for this disaster and discussing how we can reverse it in the years that lie ahead. Now, as far as the reasons for this disaster are concerned, I think that there is a general disillusionment with large sections of the public against the politicians, with some exceptions, but in generally with the political class and the system, which encourages corruption, which overlooks corruption, which is blind to corruption. This was the case under Cardoso, it was the case under Lula, and I felt even at the time after Lula's first victory that unless there was a clean break made, and very openly by discussing it with the people, saying this is what we are trying to do, and a break also with the neoliberal measures that the first Lula government did, it would not be a good situation. And so we are now at long last witnessing this result, a huge backlash fueled by Brazilian reaction, the Brazilian establishment, the large numbers of evangelists and evangelical groups that have grown up in this country over the last 20 years, and a failure of voters sympathetic to the PT in the past to come out and vote. I think it's a combination of these two things that is going on, because the vote was very high for Bolsonaro. As far as Bolsonaro is concerned, it is difficult to describe him as anything else but a semi-fascist politician of the far right who supports the military dictatorships of the past, thinks they did a good job. In other words, he supports torture, brutalities, imprisonment without trial, forcing into exile large numbers of people, which those military dictatorships did. I remember them well. We had many people who had to leave Brazil and go elsewhere. So this is the situation, and we have to ask ourselves: did all the people who combined in a conspiracy to prevent Lula from contesting this election, are they all feeling happy? Or are some of them perhaps feeling maybe we went too far? Well, whatever they're feeling, it's too late, because the process they set into motion has now prevented the only candidate who could have defeated Bolsonaro from participating in the elections. So on that level, we have to say that Brazilian democracy has been very seriously damaged by its own ruling class, by the traditional rulers of this country, by the judiciary under heavy pressure, and behind the scenes, of course, by the United States, who are delighted with this result, who will be very happy to have a president in power who can now help to destabilize and remove any even slightly progressive governments that exist in the region. The only thing I will say, that though it doesn't make up for this Bolsonaro's victory, is that on the other side of South America, close to the borders of the United States, we have a victory for López Obrador in the Mexican election. So not everything in this continent is going bad, but Brazil is the largest country, in some ways the most important economy in South America, and this huge turn to the far right, will end badly. Ultimately, it'll end badly. And then the question arises, if it ends badly, will the PT recover? I think not. I think it's a very discredited party, because even though Lula himself is personally popular with the poor and with important sections of the masses, the PT itself has declined. I mean, the fact that apart from a single state, which happens to be the state from where Lula comes, everywhere else the PT was smashed, defeated, and Bolsonaro and his gangs triumphed. We have to, it would be wrong simply to say that yes, he's a fascist, without explaining what are the reasons he got into power.
And what would be the consequence of an eventual Bolsonaro government, both for the economy and for democracy?
The consequences internally, I think that this will be a government, by and large, a government of the very rich, who have backed him coming to power. It will be extremely bad for, it looks like it. I mean, you know, just a few days ago, some of Bolsonaro's thugs and hoodlums attacked a few journalists, 2 journalists from Global, which is a newspaper that was de facto supporting against Lula. So this will carry on. They will basically try and end any dissenting voices in the press or on state television. I think they will get rid of large numbers of people who work for state television and for various other enterprises in which the government has some say. And I think that dissent will become difficult in the immediate years. I think trade union rights will be weakened. I think strikes will probably be punished. Maybe I'm exaggerating, but just looking at what's happened and what is being promised, this is the picture I see. I hope I'm wrong, but I fear I'm right.
You say in the beginning that the U.S. could be acting behind the scenes. Many say that the coup in Brazil in 2016 has the hand of the United States that wants the oil, wants the resources, the natural resources, and wants to end the popular government. Do you believe that the United States is still acting in favor of Bolsonaro just right now?
Well, the United States is never absent from South America, which, you know, it does regard as its backyard, because it's been extremely busy with the wars in the Middle East and parts of Africa. and has taken its eyes off South America, doesn't mean that they have lost interest in it. They've been doing lots of things. They were behind the coup together with the Spanish government against Hugo Chavez. They have tried to topple Maduro. They have tried to destabilize the Cuban government. They have attacked Morales. They have now won over the government in Ecuador, which is a disaster for us. And the policies in Ecuador, I think, are part and parcel of the strategy to take back South America from the progressives. That is what is going on. So I think that the fact that there were no objections to the way in which Dilma Rousseff was removed, by a coup d'etat, however constitutional it was a coup. To remove a person against whom there are no charges at all, the way they've insisted that Lula be kept in prison. And at one time they were talking, the Americans, when Chavez was still active, of using Lula against him, saying Lula is the good South American leader and Chavez is the bad, evil one. Now Lula is bad as well. By and large, they don't defend him because there's no one they're really worried about. So I think the United States are involved, and we will see repercussions of this, I think, within 6 months, if not earlier.
We saw that this great movement in the internet. It seems like the same movement we saw in Brexit, or even in the Trump election. Many are seeing the signs of the kind of use of the internet in order to make the Bolsonaro growth. Is it possible also?
Well, it is very easy, and I've seen liberal journalists combining everything together. Each case is different. The Brexit result in Britain, you can't describe it simply as something right-wing. It was the way in which many working-class people and others kicked neoliberalism. They were fed up with it. And I see Brexit as a cry of rage against the neoliberal order. Of course, there were some racist groups and right-wing groups which tried to take advantage of it. But ultimately, the result of Brexit was that we got Jeremy Corbyn as the leader of the Labour Party, winning 1 million more votes than before, the highest vote in this century for the Labour Party. Trump, again, is the product of Obama's failures. There is no way of separating Trump from Obama and his failures as a president, both globally but also domestically. And Trump came in using that sort of demagogy. The big difference with Bolsonaro is that he never pretended to be what he isn't. He said what he is. He said, this is who I am. Yes, I don't like what has happened with communists active in Brazil, with the PT pact with people who are not patriotic. And the best time we had in recent years was during the military. Now, this is very different from what happened in other parts of the world. It's a guy saying, yeah, I am of the right and I will restore stability and order, and my model is the military dictatorship.
So we cannot compare Bolsonaro with the other situations in the world. And how about Italy and how about Hungary?
Well, that's a different thing. In Italy, too, you see. There are some similarities. That in all these countries, it is a revolt against the dominant left, center, and right center governments that have taken place. And, Fernando Haddad is a very sweet guy. I know him. I met him. I have spoken with him in Sao Paulo last year. But he is not the sort of political leader like Lula. He is not a political leader who can take on Bolsonaro in front of huge mass rallies. And he, as mayor of Sao Paulo, discredited himself. It has to be said, when the student uprising first began, before it was taken over by right-wing forces. So the failure of the PT in government to transform the social-economic structures to a limited extent, apart from the Bolsa Familia, which was, of course, good but limited. No attempt was made to create a health service, to improve education, what's happening in the prisons, or the attempts were very limited. And so there was no huge section of the population which felt a loyalty to Pete, as even you have in Venezuela today, that many people still vote for Maduro, despite all the economic problems, because they see the Chavistas and the Bolivarians there as people who tried to help us and did help us for many, many years. And this is the case with the Bolsa Familia for the very poor, but it is not the case with other parts of the population in Brazil. And unfortunately, we have to say that this is the result of trying to run a country without a plan, a strategic plan, to begin to shift its priorities structurally on certain key issues, like creating a social infrastructure that favors the poor.
You talk about Venezuela. Do you believe that's possible that Trump make a military intervention in South America? How do you see this?
I think after Bolsonaro's victory, anything is possible.
Excuse me?
I think they would like to use the Brazilian army to help them. The Americans have always liked doing that, using strong military regimes, either officially or unofficially, to try and destabilize countries in South America that they don't like. So the question now is, will the Brazilian army allow itself to be used to disable, dismantle governments, organize regime change, so-called in neighboring countries and in the continent as a whole? That is what the United States will be pushing for.
So an eventual Bolsonaro government will be used by the United States. It will be like a puppet of the United States.
It will be used by the United States, and it will allow itself to be used because it agrees with the United States. It's not that they will be doing these things against their will. They will be doing them because they agree with them.
You participated in the movement to support President Lula, or to support President Lula's struggle against his prison. Why? Mm-hmm. Why did you do that?
Because I would have backed Lula, and I did back Lula against Bolsonaro. I mean, to have had Lula as a candidate in this election would have been crucial. I think he would have won, but even if he had lost, the margin of loss would have been very small, even if he had lost. But I think he would have won. And I think at a time when you have a semi-fascist clique having won the day in Brazil, or on the way to do so, as we knew from opinion polls even before, anyone with any sense would support Lula to prevent this disaster from happening. And I supported him, of course, for that and for other reasons. But they knew this, the Brazilian rulers and establishment. They knew this full well, that Lula had to be disqualified from this election. So it's public, everyone knows it. Not too many people amongst the rulers of the world are talking about it, because I think many of them, they will sort of say, yes, Bolsonaro is a complete imbecile in many ways, but we have to work with him, so we will hold our nose and work with him. But there's not going to be much nose holding, because they work with other people like him.
So we have a second term in the end of the month. Do you believe that democracy can still be saved in Brazil?
Look, the fact is that Bolsonaro, whether we like it or not, has won a democratic election with his main opponent disabled. So Brazilian democracy and its constitution and its structures pushed that through. They got rid of Dilma, they disqualified Lula. So we can say it's a democracy that is truncated, and a democracy which is now suffering a very severe heart problem. Let's put it like that. And who is going to provide the heart transplant for Brazilian democracy?
Can the people do that?
People can do that, new movements can do that. The young leader of the homeless workers movement, who I have heard speaking, is a very, very impressive young man, extremely intelligent, and I think we have now to look for the new generation to produce leaders, unless this government starts to kill people. By the way, just to make this in public, whoever it was who tried to kill or attacked Bolsonaro, carried out a knife attack, didn't do the Brazilian left any favors. It was a crazy thing to do, and it's not, actions like this are never really of benefit to the left as a whole, and I have no doubt that that enabled him to win some more sympathy.
In the beginning of the 21st century, you start a movement here in Brazil, you participate of the World Social Forum. Do you believe that these ideas still are...
I think we moved way beyond the World Social Forum, because at the time of the World Social Forum, the changes in South America weren't visible, or that visible, when it began. Then we had the Bolivarian experience with its positive sides and some of its more problematic sides. It's still not completely over. We shouldn't judge the continent at the moment simply by the result in Brazil. As I said, López Obrador's victory in Mexico shows change going in the other direction. A corrupt right-wing, neoliberal, pro-American government finally pushed aside by the people. On previous occasions in Mexico, they had rigged the elections against López Obrador, at least once, very clearly. So Mexico is not an unimportant country. So we shall see what happens, but I think a lot will depend on the capacity of the mass movements to develop and begin a campaign of political resistance.
So, despite of the defeat in the first round of the elections, now we see lots of small groups discussing things in the internet and trying to organize themselves to fight fascism in Brazil. What do you think of this kind of like professors, students, social movements trying to give a different answer to this problem that they face now?
Well, they're right to do so. I think we have to think and discuss a strategy of resistance on every level to this regime, especially if it starts moving to repress working class actions, working class strikes, makes the condition of landless peasants even worse, prevents the serious discussions taking place in universities, sacks large numbers of university professors. If this starts happening, you can't just deal with it saying we wait for the next election and see if we can find a good candidate. You have to start organizing now from below. It's a huge task given the scale of this victory. You know, it's a huge vote for the first round in Brazilian elections. And as I said, every city, more or less, in every state, big city and state, had voted for him. So it's not going to be easy, because ultimately we must remember always that millions of people, the masses, learn from their own experiences. You can't teach them just by clever political speeches or by writing books or by even knocking on doors. They will learn through their own experience. So I'm not saying that the left should sit still and do nothing, but I think as far as a big turn of the masses is concerned, it will require their own experience for them to move again. It's not every day that people move in this dramatic fashion, from the PT and the center-left style governments to a semi-fascist government.
So, looking at the world, do you believe that 10 years after the Great Crisis in 2008, we are now facing a world with more influence of the right, with more concentration of wealth? What do you see the world as a whole?
Well, we're seeing two simultaneous processes. We are basically seeing the polarization of social inequalities, of the fact that a very small number of people control the wealth in each country, rich people, rich who have really got richer. We've seen sections of the middle classes, lower middle classes losing out completely. And in this atmosphere, where the left or the center-left has been in power and helped create the situation, and no new left exists, with the exception of Jeremy Corbyn in Britain, people have shifted to the right. The Italian results, you have Salvini. In France, Le Pen has been emboldened by the results in Italy. In Germany, for the first time since the Second World War, you have a huge party, the AfD, which is very right-wing. I won't say it's a fascist party because it isn't, but it is a far-right party targeting immigrants. This is in Germany. And people think sometimes that German history has been so volatile and unfortunate that people have learned their lessons. It's an idealist way of thinking. That is not how people learn lessons. People forget all this. Despite all the propaganda, the ideology, people develop new ideas or return to old ones when they think there's no other alternative. So, we're talking about Bolsonaro praising the military dictators of Brazil. There are people in Germany where it's illegal to do it, but who now on demonstrations are giving Sieg Heil salutes and celebrating Nazi triumphs of the past. That's the world we live in, and the left still has not fully recovered from the defeat of the 90s in the last century with the collapse of the Soviet Union and that entire world. Not easy to recover from that. They are trying. There are young people all over the world who are challenging this. In the United States, we had the Bernie Sanders phenomenon, which was very exciting, as social democrat fighting both his own party leaders and Trump. So it's one can't forget all this or write it off. But nonetheless, the turn to the right taken by bourgeois politicians and by parties in Italy is an indication of what is going on in the world. How long this will last will really depend on how long the left takes to organize some counterblast.
You talk about Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders with Yanis Varoufakis and others are talking about the creation of progressive international movement. Do you believe that's possible? What do you think is the future of this?
Well, it depends on how it's organized, At the moment, in Europe, where there's a big turn to the right, and where the EU, the European Union, has been the engine for neoliberal economics and politics, punishing countries in the past which refused to follow their dictates, destroying the Greek left very effectively, etc., etc. This is where the right-wing groups are emerging in most of these European countries in some shape or form. So, you know, it's the time for building movements is always there, but all the indications are that the left has been considerably weakened in many parts of the world, of which the Brazilian experience is just the most dramatic.
You talk about also about Jeremy Corbyn. Do you believe that it's possible to somehow reverse the Brexit? Well, we are talking to you. We were in London. What is your impression about this change, big change in?
Well, I don't think Corbyn wants to reverse Brexit. He doesn't want to go against the will of the people expressed in a referendum. That is the view of neoliberals.
The party, the Labour Party, does not say that a new referendum must be.
No. The Labour, no, they are not in favor of a new referendum. They are just in favor of negotiating the best possible terms for the withdrawal. They don't want a Brexit unconditional withdrawal from the European Union because they believe it would damage the British economy and hurt workers. There'll be mass unemployment, etc. This is their opinion, so that is how they're fighting. But I mean, the key thing Corbyn is now demanding is a general election, because the Conservative government in Britain could not exist without the support of a small party from Northern Ireland. And this party is quite a comical right-wing party. So the fact that the Conservatives are paying this party and increasing the budget for Northern Ireland shows how desperate they are. But without this right-wing Northern Irish party, there would not be a Conservative government in Britain. You would have probably some form of agreement between Labour and the Scottish National Party and others.
And how about Trump? What do you see the future of Trump? We have an election in the United States just 2 months from now. What do you think?
I think, I mean, Trump has a base in the United States. That should not be ignored. I would say it's quite a large base. That 30% at least of the white voting population are strongly for him. It's a white supremacist base. And there's no sign so far. I mean, a key indicator will be the midterms to see how well they do. But by and large, he gets away with anything, like pushing through this judge to the Supreme Court, Kavanaugh. And here I believe that the women who brought it up with the complaints of when he was 17. Okay, but that is not sufficient because, it's too long a time ago to do the trick. What they didn't bring up was Kavanaugh's record after that, when he served in the Attorney General's office when Gonzales was Attorney General, defending torture, carrying out torture. No one ever of these people ruled him saying, do you support torture? Why didn't they? That's the weakness of American politics today. But as far as Trump is concerned, most of my American friends, colleagues, think Trump could win a second term. That this hatred for Trump by liberals and by various institutional people in the United States, people attached to ruling class institutions, makes him more popular. And the core base he has doesn't care a damn. Tomorrow someone will say he murdered, let's say he was driving a car late at night, drunk, and he ran over a black guy. I'm making this up, just so no one else. But were this to come out, people would say, oh, well, it was an accident. These things don't matter. They always find excuses for him. And I think the fact that the entire liberal media has been against him without assigning any blame to those who allowed him to come to power, like Obama, who they worshipped, is not doing the American left any good at all, or the liberals. So we shall see what happens in what happens to the Democrats over the next years is quite important, who their candidate will be. They need a strong, tough candidate to oppose Trump. Not just someone who is Obama or Hillary Clinton model, mimicking them. That's not going to do the trick, I don't think.
Some say, like the former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Brazil, Celso Amorim, that for the first time in history, the United States does not have a plan or a plan for the world. Do you believe that view is correct? It's correct to say that the United States now is so focused in itself, in internal affairs, that it did not have this plan for the world. Is correct to say that?
Who said that?
Celso Amorim, former Minister of Lula in the Foreign Relations.
Well, all I can say is that it's a very foolish remark. It is to mistake appearance for reality. The fact that Trump is in power, the United States has had strange presidents before in their own history, most recently Ronald Reagan, not a very intelligent guy. Excuse me. And I would say that what happens is that in conditions like this, a sort of natural Politburo, the equivalent of a Politburo, takes shape in American politics, which consists of the military, which consists of senior civil servants from the State Department and elsewhere, which consists of individuals like Kissinger and Cheney and Rumsfeld, or their equivalents, and they act in concert together to prevent any disasters from taking place and to prevent any president from carrying out policies which they believe damage American imperialism and its interests. And this group is in place. I mean, when at one point, before the talks with North Korea, Trump threatened to blow them out of this world, destroy them. Pentagon generals and Pentagon PR people were very quick to tell everyone this is not the policy of the United States. They said it in private, but it was leaked. And so we shall see. On Israel, Trump is no different from any other president. He's more honest. He's done what they wanted to do and were scared to do on Jerusalem, and completely wiping out the Palestinians as a political entity, which Trump was backing of Netanyahu was doing. But, Obama was not good on that. Hillary Clinton was awful on the Palestinian questions, and Bush Jr., the same. So Israel has a complete stranglehold on U.S. foreign policy, but this is nothing new. The Trump administration has got very aggressive. The country that makes them very nervous, even more than Russia, is China. So you have the reason they're not getting out of Afghanistan is because it's the only country that borders with China where they have very strong military bases, the United States. So people who think that America has no strategic global aims because they're all obsessed with internal politics is living in a dreamland.
It's very dark in the room, I believe, the night.
Oh, that's bad.
That's bad.
Is that better?
Yeah, that's better. Yeah, let's just go back a little bit in the time. you've been doing a series of lectures about 1968, the events of May 1968. I'd like to know what's the legacy of those movements, if any?
Well, I mean, in Brazil it's ironic, but during '68 you had a military dictatorship. So Brazil is celebrating '68 by electing a president who supports the military dictatorship that existed in '68. I mean, it's a sad... No, I'm saying, that is what you see. In Mexico, it's the opposite. I'm going to Mexico in 10 days' time for the big book fair in the Zocalo, where they are commemorating '68 as well, with a president who hated what took place in Mexico City in '68 when hundreds of students were killed by the army and police. So the legacies are mixed of the '68. In a way, it's a sort of celebration now of utopia. We had the courage to think that we could change the world. We didn't succeed, but we don't regret anything. We were right on more things than people imagine. And many of the things we said then are still coming true in terms of what capitalism is, what it does. They're much truer now than they were in the '60s even. I think, one has to be very open about this. The '60s were not a disaster. The '60s failed in most parts of the world for contingent reasons.
Okay, we'd like to... some curiosity. Before joining this interview, I read lots of things about you and about your role in the construction of the music Imagine of John Lennon. Could you tell us about your relation with Lennon, the Beatles, and the Rolling Stones also?
Well, it's slightly boring for me now. It's a long time ago. And poor John Lennon is dead, but they're making a new documentary film for the anniversary of Imagine. I think for 2020. Maybe, I don't know. No, the song was first sung, I think, in 1971, so it'll be for that. And they found a lot more footage. I mean, I was very privileged that, to know John and Yoko, and he was very involved in many ways with the movement and helped and wrote, he did the big... I went to interview him with my colleague Robin Blackburn from a radical newspaper of that period. We're now both on the New Left Review. And we spent many friendly hours. And that interview then became quite iconic. And the day after the interview, John rang me up at my office and said, "Hi, I thought the interview went very well. In fact, I'm very inspired by the interview. And I've written this song for the movement as a result of it." So I said, "What's the song?" He said, "Power to the People." So I said, "Okay, the title is good." And he said, "Should I sing it to you?" So I said, "Yeah." So he sang it to me on the phone. And then later he rang. Of course, we would meet and said, "Come, there's a new album I'm making called Imagine." So we went again and sat round his kitchen table, and he sang the song, just gently, without any music, but tapping on the kitchen table. And then he looked up at me and said, "Well, what's the verdict?" And I said, "The Politburo approves."
Great.
So that was a different period. There are nice memories from it, but we have to concentrate on now and on what the future holds for our children and grandchildren and the generations to come.
Okay. Just remembering the slogan of the social forum, "Another world is possible." Do believe that another world is possible?
Well, I mean, on a sort of one level, I do believe that, but I would change the slogan to the following: another world is possible, but not with NGOs.
But not?
But not?
But not with NGOs.
Wow, with not with NGOs. So we still need power to the people organizing, but not.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So can you say a final word to Brazilians that are facing this situation?
Well, it's not, I am very sad. I think those Brazilians who voted for Bolsonaro will regret it, especially the poor, will regret it sooner than people think, and will try and do something. But it's a huge, huge mistake that was made. And I think to analyze Bolsonaro without analyzing the conditions that led to this is not going to be helpful for the left. We have to make many self-criticisms. How could this happen? And why weren't there huge mass movements when Dilma was removed by a constitutional coup d'etat? A regime which had a real base in the people, there would have been big movements, I remember when Chavez was removed by a coup, the masses poured out of the favelas, and did what had to be done. Well, nothing like that happened here. Even with Lula, it was lots of intellectuals and us from everyone, from all over the world, writing letters demanding his release, demanding that he be allowed to participate. But the levels of mobilizations in Brazil itself were not so large. In fact, they were very token, and that should have been a warning. Had he been released and allowed to participate, we would have had mass meetings with him. But there was not a mass movement to get him out of prison or to surround the places where he was held that put any pressure on these people. And the judiciary and people like that never act without pressure. They are part and parcel of what is happening in the country. So.
Just a last question. How about a military coup? Do you believe that's possible to happen here in Brazil?
To have
a military coup.
Well, they don't need a military coup with Bolsonaro. Okay. Why do they need a military coup? He'll do whatever the military wants. Mm-hmm. I don't think they need that. And I don't think the Americans particularly would like a military coup either. They don't operate like that. They've tried to find civilian ways of doing it under a constitutional mask. That's what they prefer. So a military coup in Brazil would be difficult to get American support and permission, and without that, the militaries tend not to act so much. I mean, even in Venezuela, I am told, according to press reports, that the Americans turned down any attempts to use the military to talk to them, having made that big mistake in 2002.
Even if PT wins the election, even in the case that Haddad wins the election.
I don't think the military will intervene if Haddad wins the second. It's impossible. I mean, that will show their big resistance has already begun. I mean, it would be wonderful if that happened, but I fear it's unlikely. I mean, we will all celebrate if it happens, but I think it's gone too far in the other direction to turn back now. Even if he gets Ciro's votes, he can't win. And there will be some people who voted for their own small groups, etc., will probably vote for Bolsonaro. Also, the scale and size of Bolsonaro's victory, creates a bandwagon effect. People want to be part of that bandwagon, hoping for things they will get from the new regime.
Okay. Tariq, thank you very much for...
Okay.
Being with us.
Thanks very much. Are you putting this? Is this you? If it's on Facebook, send it to me so I can put it on my
website. Yeah, we'll do that.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
All the best, friends.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Ah. Bye.
Ok. Bom, conversamos aqui durante quase uma hora, né? 50 minutos, mais de 50 minutos com o Tariq Ali, escritor paquistanês, radicado em Londres, autor de vários livros, muitos traduzidos aqui no Brasil, romances, um ativista que tem uma história de luta pelos direitos humanos, né? Enfim, em várias áreas, e que nos falou aqui do desastre que será uma eventual vitória de Bolsonaro. Né?
Uhum. Bom, essa conversa toda ficará disponível aí no nosso canal no YouTube. E, bom, a entrevista foi em inglês, né? Mas a gente vai fazer para publicação no TUTAMÉIA, tutameia.jor.br, vamos fazer a transcrição mais completa possível aí nas nossas condições, mas vai haver aí a tradução da entrevista do Tariq Ali. O vídeo fica disponível no nosso canal, no youtube.com/c/Eleonora e Rodolfo Lucena, Tutaméia, o Tutaméia escrito com letras maiúsculas, e, de novo, todo o material, a entrevista, a reportagem, no site tutameia.jor.br. Com o que, né, a gente se encaminha para o nosso bordão de encerramento, bordão político-poético, né?
Que é o contrapoema do Augusto de Campos, Lula Livre, que entra na telinha agora.
Lula Livre.